She was mocked for her size at the auction until an Amish man said, "You're just right for me." The dusty street fell silent as the gavel dropped. Laughter turned cruel, voices jeering at the woman no one wanted. Then came the sound of boots on wood and a quiet voice that cut through the shame. But this wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of a fight no one expected, because the man's valley is already marked for the railroad's iron tracks. And the woman the town mocked? She carries knowledge that could save everything or lose it all. Church bells toll, hooves thunder, flames rise in the night as enemies close in, and in the center of it all, will a bond born in humiliation and hope be strong enough to withstand greed, violence, and the weight of a whole town's scorn? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden platform in the town square, where Hazel Keene stood with her shoulders pulled back, despite the weight of shame pressing down upon her. The auctioneer's voice rang out harsh and clear across the crowd of onlookers. Next up for bidding, the widow Hazel Keene, comes with her teaching credentials, though she ain't much to look at. Cruel laughter rippled through the gathering. Hazel's cheeks burned as red as the setting sun, and she fixed her gaze on the distant mountains, trying to hold on to whatever dignity remained. Her late husband's debts had brought her to this moment, but she hadn't expected such meanness from people she'd known for years. "Look at the size of her," someone called out. "More like a draft horse than a wife." "Useless freight, that's what she is," another voice added. "Who'd want to feed such a big woman?" The auctioneer's smile faltered as his calls for bids met with silence. Men who'd eagerly bid on horses, tools, and even broken wagon wheels now stood with their arms crossed, some pointedly turning away. "Surely someone needs a capable woman." The auctioneer tried again, his voice holding an edge of desperation. "She can read and write, keep accounts." "Better to buy a proper horse," someone shouted, triggering another wave of laughter. Hazel felt herself sinking deeper into humiliation. The wooden boards beneath her feet seemed to sway, and she gripped her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. She'd taught some of these people's children, broken bread with them at church socials. Now they wouldn't even look her in the eye. The crowd's cruelty was building like a summer storm when a tall figure in a plain black coat stepped forward. The laughter died as Dale Yoder, known throughout the valley for his quiet strength and steady ways, made his way through the parting onlookers. His presence commanded respect, even from those who viewed the Amish with suspicion. "I bid enough to clear her debt," Dale said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent square. There was no mockery in his tone, no hint of pity or scandal. Whispers erupted immediately. An Amish man? Buying a woman at auction? What's he thinking? His community won't stand for it. Dale ignored them all, his steady gaze fixed on Hazel. He extended his hand to help her down from the platform, and she found herself taking it, his calloused palm warm and sure against her trembling fingers. "You're just right for me," he stated simply, loud enough for those nearest to hear. The words fell like a healing balm over Hazel's wounded spirit. The auctioneer, recovering from his surprise, quickly brought down his gavel. "Sold to Dale Yoder." As the crowd dispersed, some still muttering and casting backward glances, Dale led Hazel to his waiting wagon. The evening was settling in, painting the dusty street in shades of purple and gold. One by one, lanterns began to flicker to life on distant porches, like earthbound stars guiding them home. Dale helped her up onto the wagon seat with the same gentle respect he'd shown from the first moment. Hazel perched beside him, her mind whirling with questions she couldn't voice. Had he bought her out of pity? Was this some kind of Christian charity that would leave her even more indebted? Or did he truly see something in her that others had missed? The wagon wheels creaked as they started moving, the familiar sounds of horse hooves and leather harness filling the silence between them. Tears pressed against Hazel's eyes, but she fought them back. She'd done enough crying since becoming a widow, since watching everything she owned being seized for debt. The town fell away behind them as they followed the winding road past farms and fields. Dale handled the reins with quiet confidence, his presence beside her somehow both comforting and terrifying. When he finally spoke again, his words were simple but carried the weight of a solemn promise. "You'll be safe with me." Hazel's hands twisted in her lap, and she dared a glance at his profile, strong and steady in the fading light. His words hung in the air between them, and for the first time since her world had fallen apart, she felt a tiny spark of hope flutter in her chest. The wagon continued on through the gathering dusk, carrying them toward whatever future lay ahead, while behind them the town's gossip and cruelty faded into the lengthening shadows. The wagon jolted over the rough mountain road, making Hazel grip the wooden seat tighter. Dale handled the reins with practiced ease, guiding their horse through the deepening shadows of towering pines. The afternoon light filtered through the branches, creating shifting patterns on the dusty trail ahead. After hours of silence, Dale cleared his throat. "I have 7 siblings at home," he said, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "Our parents passed last winter. Fever took them both within days of each other." Hazel glanced at his profile, noting the slight tightening around his eyes as he spoke of his loss. "I'm sorry," she offered quietly. "The youngest is just 6. Dale continued. "I need someone strong, someone who can help with the children and work the land." He paused, then added, "Someone who knows letters and numbers to teach them proper." The word strong made Hazel flinch inwardly, remembering the cruel jokes about her size at the auction. But Dale's tone held no mockery, only simple truth. As evening approached, Dale guided the wagon off the main trail toward a creek that gurgled softly through a small clearing. "We'll rest here for the night," he said, helping her down from the wagon. "There's good water, and the horses need it." While Dale tended to the horses, Hazel stood awkwardly, unsure of her place in this temporary camp. But he soon showed her a cloth-wrapped package of cornbread and a pot of beans he'd packed for the journey. They ate in comfortable silence, the creek's gentle song filling the space between them. "You'll sleep under the wagon canopy," Dale insisted as darkness fell. "It'll keep you warm and dry." He spread clean blankets beneath the canvas covering, then moved to tend the fire, settling himself on the ground nearby. Hazel lay awake for a long while, listening to the night sounds of the mountain forest and watching the fire's glow paint shadows on the canvas above her. The strange day's events tumbled through her mind, the auction's humiliation, Dale's unexpected bid, and now this journey into an uncertain future. Dawn brought a pearl-grey mist that draped the ridges like a delicate shawl. Hazel woke early, her body stiff from sleeping on the wagon bed. She made her way to the creek, self-consciousness weighing heavy as she washed her face and hands in the cold water. When she returned to camp, Dale offered her a tin cup of coffee without comment, as if sharing morning coffee was something they'd done 100 times before. They set out again as the mist began to lift, the wagon wheels creaking a steady rhythm. The road wound higher into the mountains, and Hazel noticed changes in the landscape. Telegraph poles marching along the valley below, marking the railroad's steady advance into the wilderness. Dale's usual calm expression darkened as he glanced at the poles. "They'll be cutting too close to our valley," he muttered, his hands tightening slightly on the reins. "The railroad's been buying up water rights wherever they can." Hazel studied his face, wondering if his Amish faith, with its emphasis on peace and non-resistance, would be enough to stand against such determined expansion. The telegraph poles seemed to mock the simple way of life Dale represented, their stark lines cutting through the natural beauty of the mountain landscape. As the second day drew to a close, the mountains loomed larger ahead, their peaks touched with golden light. Dale guided the wagon around a final bend, and suddenly there it was, a solid cabin built of squared logs, with a stone chimney sending tendrils of smoke into the evening air. A neat garden spread to one side, and a barn stood strong against the mountain backdrop. "Home?" Dale said simply. Before Hazel could respond, children's voices rang out from the yard. "Dale's back! Dale's back!" Small figures appeared, running toward the wagon with excitement that turned to curious hesitation when they spotted Hazel. The reality of her situation struck her then with full force. This wasn't just a temporary shelter or a brief stopping place. This cabin, these children, this mountain homestead, this would be her new life. Her throat tightened as she watched the children gather, 7 pairs of eyes studying her with mixed curiosity and uncertainty. The youngest, surely the 6-year-old Dale had mentioned, clutched an older sister's skirt and peeked out shyly. The wagon came to a stop in the yard, and for a moment Hazel couldn't move. The simple beauty of the place, the obvious care that had gone into making it a home, the children's watching faces, it all overwhelmed her with equal measures of fear and possibility. What if she failed these children who had already lost so much? What if she couldn't be what Dale needed her to be? Inside the cabin, warmth from the stone fireplace wrapped around Hazel like a blanket, but it did little to ease her nervousness as 3 pairs of eyes studied her intently. Dale's siblings stood in a protective cluster, the oldest boy positioning himself slightly in front of his sisters. "This is Samuel," Dale said, resting his hand on the 12-year-old's shoulder. Samuel's jaw was set firm, his eyes wary beneath dark brows that matched his brother's. "Ruth," Dale continued, nodding to a girl of 10 whose long braids were tied with plain blue ribbons. She gripped the hand of the smallest child, barely steady on her feet. "And this is Miriam." The toddler peered up at Hazel with wide brown eyes, one thumb tucked firmly in her mouth. She couldn't have been more than 18 months old, and something in Hazel's chest tightened at the sight of her small face. "I'll show you where to put your things," Dale said, leading her to a small room off the main living area. It held a narrow bed with a carefully pieced quilt. "This was our mother's sewing room," he explained quietly. Hazel set her modest bundle on the bed, aware of Ruth watching from the doorway. The girl's expression was unreadable, but her grip on the doorframe spoke volumes. In the kitchen, Hazel found a pot of stew simmering over the fire. "May I help?" she asked, spotting the stack of wooden bowls on the shelf. Dale nodded. "Samuel, bring the bread." Hazel ladled the thick stew carefully, making sure each bowl had a fair share of vegetables and meat. Her hands were steady, though her heart wasn't. When she passed Samuel his bowl, he accepted it without meeting her eyes. They ate in silence, broken only by the clink of spoons and the occasional pop from the fire. Hazel felt every movement watched, every bite measured. She kept her back straight, trying to appear smaller than she was, more delicate somehow. But there was no hiding her broad shoulders or work-roughened hands. That night, lying in her narrow bed, voices drifted through the thin wall. Ruth's whisper carried clear as creek water. "She's too big to be a mother." Hazel pressed her face into the pillow, the words cutting deeper than the auction block mockery. But as she listened to the settling sounds of the cabin, Dale's heavy boots on the porch, making one final check of the animals, Samuel's quiet prayers, Miriam's soft baby breaths from the next room, determination grew in her heart. She would prove herself useful, if not beautiful. Before dawn, Hazel slipped from her bed. In the kitchen, she found the flour barrel and yeast. Her fingers remembered the rhythm of kneading dough, a comfort learned at her own mother's side. By the time Dale's boots sounded on the porch, returning from morning chores, 3 loaves were rising under clean cloths, filling the kitchen with the promise of fresh bread. Dale paused in the doorway, his eyes taking in the scene. A slight nod was his only comment, but Hazel caught the approval in it. The day unfolded in a stream of small tasks. Hazel found torn shirts in the mending basket and set to work, her stitches neat and strong. She swept floors worn smooth by years of feet, dusted windowsills, and learned the placement of every pot and pan in the kitchen. Samuel brought his slate to the table, struggling with his letters. Hazel watched him scratch awkward lines, his frustration growing visible in the set of his shoulders. "May I?" she asked softly, holding out her hand for the slate. Samuel hesitated, then passed it over. "See how the bee has 2 bumps, like a butterfly's wings?" She demonstrated, her chalk strokes sure and clear. "Now you try." His next attempt was steadier, and though he didn't smile, the tension in his face eased slightly. The sweetest moment came when Miriam, apparently deciding Hazel was safe enough, crawled into her lap while she mended. The toddler's small fingers tugged at Hazel's sleeve, exploring the fabric with innocent curiosity. Hazel's heart swelled at this simple acceptance. As evening settled over the mountain, Dale lit the lantern. Its gentle glow softened the cabin's corners, making everything feel more like home. He watched as Hazel helped Ruth clear the supper dishes, Miriam still trailing at her skirts. "The children will see your heart soon enough," Dale said quietly, his words carrying across the room. Warmth bloomed in Hazel's chest at his words, but she couldn't completely silence the echo of town voices in her mind. "Bought at auction." The phrase clung to her thoughts like burrs to a wool skirt, refusing to be brushed away. A week of settling into routines had eased some of Hazel's initial awkwardness with the children. The morning sun found her helping Dale hitch the wagon for their supply run into town. Her stomach knotted at the thought of facing those who had witnessed her shame at auction, but necessities couldn't wait. "The flour barrel's nearly empty," she said, adjusting her bonnet against the mountain breeze. "And we need lamp oil." Dale nodded, his steady hands checking the harness straps. "Samuel can mind things here. Ruth knows Miriam's schedule." The wagon creaked as they rolled down the mountain path, aspen leaves shimmering silver green overhead. Hazel gripped the wooden seat as they navigated rocky stretches, aware of Dale's solid presence beside her. He handled the reins with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything. Town appeared through the trees, a clutch of wooden buildings strung along the dusty main street. Hazel held her head high as curious faces turned their way. Let them stare. She was no longer alone on that auction block. The mercantile's bell chimed as they entered. While Dale discussed feed prices with Mr. Jenkins, Hazel carefully selected their supplies. She couldn't help overhearing the conversation between 2 ranchers near the seed bins. "Railroad's pushing through the valley," one said, spitting tobacco juice into a brass cuspidor. "Survey crews marked it last week." "Ain't nothing stops those iron horses," his companion replied. "They'll take what they want." A weathered rancher in a sweat-stained hat approached Dale. "Best watch yourself, Yoda. Company men mean business. They'll fence your creek before you blink." Dale's expression remained placid. "My father's deed protects our water rights." The land was properly purchased. Hazel's ears pricked at this. Her father, the schoolteacher, had taught her the importance of proper documentation. She'd spent countless evenings helping him grade papers and file records. "What kind of deed?" she asked Dale quietly as they loaded supplies. Did your father record it with the territory office? We'll discuss it at home, Dale replied, his tone gentle but firm. On the return journey, they encountered Henry, the Ute elder, mounted on a paint horse. His weathered face creased in greeting as Dale pulled the wagon to a stop. Hazel noticed the easy respect between the two men. There was history here. The iron road comes closer, Henry said, gesturing toward the valley with a leather-wrapped hand. They promise much, deliver little. The railroad cheats my people too. His dark eyes met Dale's. Guard your papers, friend. Dale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They bid Henry farewell and continued home, the wagon wheels turning in dusty silence. Hazel's mind whirred with questions. That evening, after the children were asleep, she found Dale at the kitchen table reading his Bible by lamplight. Show me the deed, she said softly, sitting across from him. Dale's fingers stilled on the worn pages. Several moments passed before he spoke. The original. We cannot find it. Cannot find it. Hazel leaned forward. What happened? Father trusted it to Preacher Matthews for safekeeping, years back. The preacher moved west for his health. We've had no word since. Dale's voice held carefully contained worry. We have copies, but copies may not stand against the railroad's lawyers. Hazel finished. Her father's lessons echoed in her memory. The importance of original documents, proper seals, official recordings. Dale nodded slowly. We've worked this land 15 years, built every fence post, dug every well. The children were born here. His quiet words carried the weight of generations. Later, in her narrow bed, Hazel lay awake listening to night sounds, crickets chirping, aspen leaves rustling, the occasional distant coyote. Her mind churned with possibilities. This wasn't just about Dale's family anymore. The railroad would affect Henry's people too, and other settlers in the valley. A strange certainty settled over her. Perhaps God had guided Dale to that auction for more than just helping with children and chores. Her father had taught her to read carefully, to understand legal language, to keep precise records. Those skills, combined with Dale's steady faith and Henry's knowledge of the land, might be exactly what the valley needed. Sleep eluded her as she stared at the cabin's rough-hewn ceiling. Finding that deed meant more than securing Dale's land. It meant proving she truly belonged here, that she was more than a woman bought at auction. It meant protecting not just a homestead, but a community. Dawn painted the mountain peaks in soft gold as Hazel's feet touched the cabin's wooden floor. She had taken to rising before anyone else, finding peace in the quiet moments before the day began. The kitchen stove crackled to life under her careful attention as she measured flour for the morning's bread. Through the window, she watched Dale heading to the barn, his tall figure moving with purpose through the misty yard. His way of facing each day with quiet devotion had begun to shape her own rhythms. Prayer, work, kindness, these formed the foundation of his faith. The familiar sounds of kneading dough filled the kitchen. Thump, fold, turn. Thump, fold, turn. By the time little feet padded down the stairs, fresh bread scented the air. Ruth appeared first, her eyes bright with curiosity. "May I help with the cow?" the girl asked, smoothing her apron. Hazel smiled, remembering Ruth's initial wariness. "Come along then. I'll show you how to get the best milk from old Bessie." In the barn, Hazel guided Ruth's small hands on the cow's warm udder. Gentle but firm, like this. The milk sang against the tin pail as Ruth got the rhythm right. "You're a natural," Hazel said softly. Ruth's answering smile warmed her heart more than the morning sun. Later, as Samuel struggled over his scripture reading at the kitchen table, Hazel sat beside him. "Sound it out slowly," she encouraged, her finger tracking the words. "Like building a fence, one post at a time." the boy's brow furrowed in concentration. "The Lord is my shepherd," he managed. His chest puffed with pride as he finished the verse. "Well done," Hazel praised. She noticed Dale watching from the doorway, his eyes holding approval for them both. Throughout the day, Hazel observed Dale's ways. He checked the fence line without a rifle, though wolves had been seen nearby. Before every meal, no matter how simple, he bowed his head in genuine thanks. When Samuel came in angry from a dispute with a neighbor boy, Dale counseled patience instead of revenge. "Violence solves nothing," he explained, helping Samuel mend a torn shirt. "Peace must guide every action." Hazel admired Dale's conviction, but worried. Would such gentle faith stand against railroad men's greed? She had seen their kind before, men who measured worth in dollars and deals. The afternoon sun slanted golden when Henry appeared in the yard, a wrapped bundle across his horse's back. Dale welcomed him with the respect due an elder, while Hazel hurried to put coffee on the stove. Around the hearth, Henry shared the venison he'd brought and something more precious: stories. His deep voice carried memories of broken promises, of hunting grounds turned to railroad cuts, of treaties signed and ignored by distant men in Washington. "My grandfather's grandfather knew these valleys," Henry said, his weathered hands cradling a coffee cup. The paper promises meant nothing to those who came with iron and greed. Hazel listened, her heart heavy with recognition. Different circumstances, but the same dismissal she'd felt on that auction block, being seen as less than human. After Henry rode out, Dale found Hazel in the kitchen preparing supper. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" She paused in slicing carrots. "For everything. The children are happier. The house feels—" He searched for words. "More whole." Heat rushed to Hazel's cheeks. Praise felt foreign after so much scorn. She busied herself with the vegetables, but Dale's words settled deep in her heart. That evening, as lamplight cast soft shadows, Hazel stood watching Miriam sleep. The toddler's peaceful face, her tiny hands curled against the quilt, stirred something profound in Hazel's chest. She closed her eyes. "Lord," she whispered, "help me be worthy of this place, this family. Show me how to serve them well." A floorboard creaked behind her. Dale stood in the doorway, his face gentle in the dim light. Something glistened in his eyes, understanding perhaps, or his own prayer of thanks. He nodded once before moving away, leaving Hazel to her devotions. Looking down at Miriam, then through the door where Ruth and Samuel slept, Hazel felt a shift in her heart. She was no longer the woman bought to clear a debt. Here, among these plain people with their deep faith and gentle ways, she had found something she'd never dared hope for: belonging. The cabin settled into night sounds, crickets chirping, wind in the aspens, the soft breathing of children at peace. Hazel touched Miriam's small hand once more before heading to her own rest, gratitude filling her heart. The mountain valley stirred with spring's gentle awakening. Tender green buds dotted the aspen branches, and morning frost gave way to soft earth ready for planting. Dale stood in the freshly tilled field, his plain black coat set aside as he worked the soil. "The ground's ready," he called to Hazel, who approached carrying seed potatoes in her apron. Together they worked the morning hours, Hazel's strong shoulders proving as capable with the plow as Dale's. Her broad frame, once a source of mockery in town, moved with natural grace through the farming tasks. When she guided the plow through a particularly stubborn patch, the blade cutting clean furrows, Dale nodded with approval. "You've got a feel for it," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Better than most I've seen." Hazel ducked her head, but pleasure bloomed in her chest where shame had once lived. They moved on to the corn planting, working side by side in companionable rhythm. The sun climbed higher as they measured careful spaces between seeds. That evening, after bowls of stew were emptied and the kitchen tidied, Ruth tugged at Hazel's sleeve. "Tell us a story," the girl asked, her eyes bright with hope. "Please." Hazel settled into the rocking chair, Ruth and Samuel gathering close while Dale tended to baby Miriam. The lamplight cast warm shadows as Hazel began her tale. "Once there was a girl who thought herself too different to be loved," she started, her voice soft but strong. She was taller than other girls, with hands made for work instead of fancy things. But God had special plans for her. As she wove her story of courage and acceptance, Dale lingered in the doorway. His presence felt steady, like the mountain itself, as he watched her voice soothe the children toward sleep. Something in his gaze made Hazel's words flow easier, as if he too drew comfort from the tale. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Hazel took the wooden buckets to fetch water from the creek, her steps sure on the familiar path. But spring had left the rocks slick with moss. Her foot slipped, and for a heart-stopping moment she felt herself falling. Strong hands caught her arm, steadying her against gravity's pull. Dale had followed, carrying buckets of his own. Their eyes met and held, his grip gentle but firm on her arm. Something electric passed between them, a moment of connection that went beyond mere duty or gratitude. "Thank you," Hazel whispered, her voice barely stirring the morning air. Dale's hand lingered a moment longer than necessary before releasing her, and Hazel felt warmth spread through her chest. When Sunday arrived, they loaded the wagon for the trip to the meeting house. Hazel smoothed her plain dress, fighting old anxieties as they approached the gathering of families. Whispers still followed her. The woman bought at auction, the outsider among the faithful. But Dale's presence beside her gave her strength. As they reached the meeting house steps, neighbors approached to greet them. Dale's voice rang clear and certain. "This is Hazel Keene, who God has sent to our home." The simple words wrapped around Hazel's heart like a warm shawl. She lifted her chin, meeting the curious gazes with quiet dignity. A few women nodded, seeing perhaps more than just her size now. Ruth slipped her small hand into Hazel's, another anchor in this sea of acceptance and lingering doubt. That evening, peace settled over the cabin like a familiar quilt. Hazel sat in her rocking chair, needle flashing in the firelight as she mended one of Samuel's shirts. Dale occupied his own chair by the hearth, his knife moving steadily over a piece of wood he was carving. No words passed between them, but the silence felt rich with understanding. The children slept upstairs, their soft breathing mingling with the crackle of the fire and the gentle creak of Hazel's chair. Each movement, each shared glance, carried the weight of something new growing between them, tender as spring buds, steady as the mountains themselves. Hazel watched Dale's hands move over the wood, remembering how those same hands had caught her at the creek, how they guided his children with gentleness, how they worked alongside her own without judgment. Love, she realized, could grow as quietly as corn in freshly turned soil, taking root before its presence was fully known. Dale stood in the dim light of early morning, studying the worn map Henry had sketched for them. Hazel moved quietly through the cabin, wrapping bread and cheese in clean cloths for their journey. The county seat lay a full day's wagon ride ahead, their chance to find the missing deed before the railroad men pressed closer. "I reckon we ought to start while the dew's still fresh," Dale said, folding the map carefully. Hazel nodded, tucking the food bundle into their traveling basket. She had risen before dawn to bake fresh bread for the children they would leave behind. Samuel, the oldest at 12, had promised to mind his sisters, but worry still creased his young brow. The sun was just kissing the mountain peaks when they loaded the wagon. Ruth held baby Miriam on her hip, both girls watching with solemn eyes as Dale helped Hazel onto the wooden seat. Samuel stood straighter, trying to look brave. "Mind the chickens," Hazel reminded him gently. "And remember—" "I know," Samuel said. "Read my scripture before bed." The wagon wheels creaked as they started down the rutted road. The children's waves grew smaller until the path curved around a stand of aspens, hiding them from view. Hazel's heart ached, already missing their presence. As morning stretched toward noon, Hazel found herself sharing memories of her father's schoolroom. "He taught me to read legal documents when I was just Ruth's age," she said, surprising herself with the ease of speaking. "Said knowledge was a gift from God, meant to be used." Dale listened intently, his hands steady on the reins. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He believed in justice," Hazel said softly. "Said even the simplest writing could protect what's right, if you understood its power." They stopped at a clear running creek when the sun stood high. Dale helped Hazel down from the wagon, his touch careful but sure. The spring air carried the scent of wild roses and sun-warmed pine needles. Before touching the food, Dale bowed his head in prayer. Hazel joined him without hesitation, their shared silence filled with gratitude and purpose. The simple meal of bread and cheese tasted rich in the mountain air. "I never thought to question the deed's safekeeping," Dale admitted as they rested in the shade. "Perhaps pride kept me from seeing the danger sooner." "God gives us different eyes," Hazel said carefully, "to see what others might miss." Dale's gaze met hers, warm with understanding. Something shifted between them, like sunlight breaking through clouds. The afternoon passed with steady progress, the wagon following the valley's curve toward civilization. By dusk, lamplight glowed in windows ahead, the county seat spreading before them in neat rows of wooden buildings. The modest inn at the edge of town offered clean beds and simple meals. The proprietor's wife raised her eyebrows at their plain dress and unexpected pairing, but Dale's quiet dignity silenced any gossip. They took separate rooms, as propriety demanded. In the privacy of her small chamber, Hazel knelt beside the narrow bed. "Lord," she whispered, "grant us wisdom for tomorrow's search. Let me be worthy of this task." Her father's lessons seemed to whisper back through the years, giving her courage. A soft knock interrupted her prayers. Dale stood in the hallway, his broad frame somehow gentle in the dim light. "I wanted to say," he began, then paused to choose his words carefully. "Your wisdom is what we need most, Hazel. God sent you to us for more than just tending house." Heat rose in Hazel's cheeks at his confidence. "I pray that's true." "I know it is," Dale said simply. Morning arrived clear and cool. They broke their fast with porridge and coffee, then walked the short distance to the courthouse. The building rose stern and square, its brick walls promising either answers or disappointment. Inside, the air hung heavy with the smell of ink and ledgers. Rows of wooden cabinets stretched toward the ceiling, each drawer holding pieces of people's lives, their hopes, their claims, their futures pressed between pages. Hazel took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Here, at last, was where her father's teachings might truly serve God's purpose. Dale stood beside her, solid as a mountain, ready to follow her lead in this unfamiliar territory. The search for truth was about to begin. The courthouse interior felt cold despite the spring warmth outside. Clerks shuffled papers at their tall desks, barely glancing up as Hazel and Dale entered. The smell of dust and aging paper filled the air, along with the scratch of metal nibs against ledger pages. "May I help you?" A thin clerk peered at them over wire-rimmed spectacles, his tone suggesting he would rather not. "We need to search land grant records," Hazel said, standing straighter. "From 15 years past." The clerk waved vaguely toward a row of heavy books. "Help yourself." Hazel settled at a wooden table, carefully opening the first massive ledger. Dale stood nearby, his quiet presence giving her strength. Hours passed as she traced her finger down countless entries, squinting at faded ink and cramped handwriting. The sun had climbed high, sending sharp rectangles of light across the floor, when Hazel's heart jumped. There, in a margin note, she found a familiar name. "Deed copy filed with Reverend Thomas, circuit preacher." "Dale," she whispered, touching the page. "The Reverend, he might still have the papers." Dale's eyes lit with hope. "He served our valley when Father first settled. Lives just beyond town now." They hurried from the courthouse, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. The Reverend's small parsonage sat at the edge of town, its weathered walls softened by climbing roses. As they approached the gate, an elderly man looked up from his garden. "Reverend Thomas!" Dale called. The old preacher straightened slowly, studying them. Sudden recognition brightened his face. "Young Dale Yoder? My word, you've grown tall as your father." Inside, the parsonage smelled of tea and old books. The Reverend's wrinkled hands shook slightly as he poured 3 cups. "The Yoder family," he mused. "Good people. Your father was wise to settle that valley alongside Henry's folk, kept peace when others chose conflict." Hazel sipped her tea, heart racing with possibility. "Sir, we're searching for documents about the land grant." "Ah." The Reverend set down his cup. "I wondered if someone might come asking, with railroad surveyors marking the territory." He rose stiffly, moving to an oak chest in the corner. "I keep important papers here." Dale and Hazel watched breathlessly as he rummaged through yellowed documents. Finally, he withdrew a brittle sheet, handling it with reverence. "Here," he said. "The original deed copy, showing the valley granted jointly to Yoder settlers and their Ute neighbors. Your father insisted on recording it that way. Said the land belonged to both peoples under God's sky." Hazel's vision blurred with tears as she read the careful script. Here was the proof they needed, the words that might protect both Dale's family and Henry's people from the railroad's greed. "Would you testify to this, if needed?" Dale asked quietly. The Reverend's spine straightened. "Gladly. God's truth must be spoken, especially when money tries to drown it out." They left with the precious document safely wrapped in clean cloth. Evening was settling over the town, stars pricking through the darkening sky. Dale and Hazel walked slowly towards the inn, their steps matching naturally. Near the inn's porch, Dale stopped. In the starlight, his face looked younger, almost boyish. He took Hazel's hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I thank God for you," he whispered. Hazel trembled, feeling the warmth of his fingers against hers. "I've prayed so long for purpose," she admitted softly. "For some sign that I wasn't just—" She swallowed hard. "Just useless freight." "Never that," Dale said firmly. "God sent you to us, to me." They stood silent in the cool evening air, hands joined, hearts beating with something deeper than words could express. Finally, Dale released her fingers and stepped back, proper distance restored. They returned to their separate rooms without speaking, though Hazel felt the weight of unspoken feelings between them. She lay awake for a long time, remembering the strength of his hand holding hers, the way his eyes had shone with gratitude and something more. Dawn brought dew and birdsong, the promise of a clear day for traveling. As they loaded the wagon for the journey home, Hazel carefully tucked the wrapped deed into her basket. The proof of their land's rightful ownership rode with them, precious as gold, but her heart carried an even greater treasure, the certainty that God had finally answered her prayers for belonging. Morning sunlight spilled across the wagon as it rolled steadily homeward. The precious deed, wrapped carefully in cloth, nestled in Hazel's basket between loaves of fresh bread she'd bought in town. The air felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of uncertainty had lifted from their shoulders. "Tell me more about your father's schoolroom," Dale said, guiding the horses around a bend. "You mentioned he taught you about contracts and such?" Hazel smiled, memories warming her voice. He believed everyone should understand the law, not just wealthy folk. Used to say knowledge was the best protection against those who'd take advantage. "Wise man," Dale nodded. "Like you with Samuel and his letters." "The boy tries hard," Hazel said, "though I reckon he still sees me as the woman bought at auction." "Give him time," Dale assured her. "He's already changing his mind, same as I've changed mine about many things." Their first evening on the trail, they made camp beside a clear stream. The spring air held just enough chill to make the campfire welcome. Dale cooked beans and bacon, while Hazel spread their blankets beneath the wagon canopy. "Remember our first journey?" she asked softly. "I was so afraid then." "And now?" Dale looked up from stirring the beans. "Now I feel—" Hazel paused, searching for words. "Like God had a plan all along." They shared comfortable silence as darkness settled around them. Crickets chirped, and somewhere an owl called. Dale's quiet humming of a hymn floated on the evening air. The next afternoon, familiar mountains rose before them. As they approached the homestead, excited shouts rang out. Ruth and Samuel burst from the cabin, running down the path. Even baby Miriam toddled after them, held steady by a neighbor woman who'd stayed to help. "Did you find it?" Samuel called, reaching the wagon first. His eyes shone with curiosity rather than his usual guardedness. Hazel carefully unwrapped the deed, showing him the formal script. "Right here. Proof that this land belongs to both your family and Henry's people." Samuel's face softened as he traced the careful writing with one finger. "You really did it," he whispered. "You found what we needed." Word spread quickly through the valley. As evening approached, neighbors began arriving, drawn by the news. They gathered in the cabin's main room, faces eager in the lamplight. Henry appeared in the doorway, dignified in his silence. Hazel stood before them, the deed spread carefully on the table. Her voice remained steady as she explained what they'd discovered. "The land grant is clear," she said. "This valley was deeded jointly to the Yoder family and their Ute neighbors. No railroad has the right to take what God and law have joined." Dale moved to stand beside her. "My father and Henry's people understood something important," he added. "This land isn't meant to be divided by greed. It's meant to be shared in peace." Henry stepped forward, his weathered face grave in the lamplight. "With this paper," he said, gesturing to the deed, "your valley stands strong. My people will stand with you against those who would take it." The neighbors talked long into the evening, sharing concerns and making plans. When the last visitor had gone, leaving only the sound of crickets and the soft glow of stars, Dale and Hazel stood together on the porch. The night air carried the scent of pine and late spring flowers. Dale turned to face her, his expression earnest in the starlight. "Hazel," he said softly, "I need to speak plain with you. That day at auction, when I said you were just right, I meant more than your strength for work. These weeks together." He paused, gathering words. "My heart has grown toward you in ways I never expected." Tears spilled down Hazel's cheeks, but she didn't brush them away. "I've been afraid to hope," she whispered. "Afraid that I was only here to mind the children and keep house." Dale took her hand gently. "You're here because God led me to you. If you're willing, I'd like to court you properly. Not as my housekeeper, but as the woman I hope to marry." Inside the cabin, They could hear the children's soft breathing in sleep, unaware of the promises taking shape in the starlight. Hazel's heart felt full enough to burst. "I'd like that very much," she managed to say. Dale smiled, squeezing her hand once before releasing it. "Then we'll begin tomorrow, with God's blessing and the children's knowing." They stood a moment longer, watching the stars scatter like diamonds across the velvet sky. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility, and the promise of love growing as steady as the seasons. The smell of smoke woke Hazel first. Through the cabin's small window, an orange glow painted the pre-dawn sky. She bolted upright, shaking Dale's shoulder. "Fire!" she cried, already running for her shawl. "The barn's burning!" Dale sprang from bed, boots in hand. They burst outside into air thick with smoke and ash. Flames licked the barn's wooden walls, casting terrible light across the yard. The sound of frightened animals filled the night. "The well!" Dale shouted, grabbing empty buckets. Hazel ran with him, her nightdress whipping in the hot wind. They formed a desperate chain, passing water from hand to hand, but the fire roared louder with each splash. Ruth appeared in the cabin doorway, clutching her shawl. "Samuel went to save the horses!" she screamed. Dale dropped his bucket, racing toward the barn entrance. Through the smoke, they could see Samuel struggling with the terrified animals. The boy managed to free 2 horses before stumbling back, coughing violently. "Miriam!" Samuel choked out between gasps. "I can't find Miriam!" Hazel's heart stopped. Without hesitation, she turned and ran for the cabin, taking the steps 2 at a time. Smoke had already seeped under the door, filling the rooms with a grey haze. She dropped to her knees, crawling toward the children's bed. "Miriam!" she called, feeling her way through the thickness. A small cough answered from the corner. There, behind the rocking chair, she found the toddler curled up and frightened but alive. Hazel scooped her up, pressing the child's face into her shoulder. "I've got you, little one," she whispered, stumbling back outside. "I've got you safe." The scene that greeted them was devastating. Neighbors had begun arriving, drawn by the flames, but they were too late to save the barn. The structure groaned and crackled, sparks shooting skyward like bitter stars. Chickens scattered across the yard in panic. Near the fence, 2 of their precious milk cows lay still, overcome by smoke. Then came Ruth's scream. "Samuel's hurt!" The boy lay crumpled near the water trough, his leg badly burned where flames had caught his trousers. Dale knelt beside his brother, face ashen with grief and fear. Hazel handed Miriam to Ruth and rushed to help. "Get me clean cloths and cool water," she ordered, taking charge. Working quickly, she tore strips from her apron to wrap Samuel's leg. The boy bit back tears as she cleaned the burn with gentle hands. "You were brave," she told him softly. "But next time, wait for help." As dawn broke, the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks. Henry arrived with other neighbors, their faces grim. One man held up a whiskey bottle stuffed with oily rags found in the grass. "Railroad men," Henry said quietly. "They leave such warnings in other valleys." Dale said nothing. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He worked mechanically through the morning, helping neighbors clear debris and tend to the surviving animals. But Hazel saw the light gone from his eyes. That evening, after the children were finally asleep, Dale sat heavily at the kitchen table. The smell of smoke still clung to everything: their clothes, their hair, their skin. Outside, the ruins of the barn smoldered against the darkening sky. "Perhaps I was wrong to resist," Dale whispered, his voice hollow. "What if they hurt the children next time? How can I risk that?" Hazel moved to his side, taking his work-roughened hand in hers. "Faith is strongest when fire tests it," she said firmly. The words came from deep within her heart, where her own struggles with doubt had taught her truth. Dale looked up, meeting her gaze. Instead of the timid woman from the auction block, he saw fierce courage burning in her eyes. The strength he had always sensed in her physical form now showed itself in spirit. Too exhausted for more words, they rose together and walked to Miriam's crib. The toddler slept peacefully, one tiny fist curled around her blanket. Smoke hung heavy in the air, but the child's breathing came soft and steady. Dale's arm slipped around Hazel's waist, drawing her close. She leaned into him, offering what comfort she could. Together they stood in the darkness, grieving their losses, but clinging to each other and to hope. Through the window, the last embers of the barn glowed like fallen stars. But inside the cabin, something stronger than fire burned, love tested by flame, faith refined by trial, and courage rising from the ashes of fear. Dawn brought a gathering of neighbors to the Yoder homestead. The charred ruins of the barn still smoldered, sending thin wisps of smoke into the morning air. Men clustered in the yard, their voices rising with anger and fear. "We ought to set watches with rifles," declared Tom Henderson, a rancher from down the valley. "Show those railroad men we mean business." "Aye," another agreed. "Can't let them burn us out one by one." Sarah Miller, whose husband farmed the next property over, wrung her hands. "Fighting will only bring more trouble. They have hired guns, mean ones." "So we just let them take what they want?" Someone shouted from the back. The argument grew heated. Dale stood silent on his porch, his face drawn with exhaustion. Hazel watched the crowd from the doorway, Miriam balanced on her hip. The toddler's small fingers played with her collar, innocent to the tension building in the yard. Finally, Hazel could bear it no longer. Setting Miriam down, she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the angry babble. "The law and truth are our weapons," she declared firmly. The neighbors fell quiet, turning to face her. "If we fall to violence, we lose all. We have the deed copy, Reverend Thomas's testimony, and proof of joint rights with the Ute people. That is our strength." Her words hung in the morning air. Several men lowered their eyes, abashed. Even Tom Henderson nodded reluctantly. Dale moved to stand beside her. Though weariness lined his face, he straightened his shoulders. "Hazel speaks wisdom," he said quietly. "We will not abandon our principles when tested." The crowd began to disperse, muttering but calmer. As the sun climbed higher, Henry appeared with 3 other Ute men, leading pack horses laden with smoked venison and dried fish. "We bring food," Henry announced simply. "Your loss is our loss. The valley must stand together." Hazel stepped forward to accept their gifts, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Your friendship gives us strength," she said warmly. "Please, share our morning meal." From his seat on the porch steps, Samuel watched the exchange with dark eyes. His bandaged leg stretched before him, a reminder of the night's terror. "Why should we trust anyone?" he muttered. "They all want our land." Hazel sat beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "Bitterness is a second fire, Samuel. It burns the heart that holds it. Henry and his people have proved true friends." The boy said nothing, but his shoulders relaxed slightly as he watched Henry help Dale sort through the ruined barn's remains. As evening approached, Dale withdrew from the others. Hazel found him sitting alone behind the cabin, gazing at the emerging stars. His plain black coat was still dusted with ash. "Your father would be proud," she said softly, settling beside him. "He taught you well about walking in peace." Dale's hands twisted in his lap. "I remember his words, but my heart is troubled. What if I lead us wrong? What if my faith brings harm to those I love?" "I doubt myself," he admitted after a long pause. "But I trust you, Hazel. God sent you to us for such a time as this." Warmth flooded Hazel's chest. The frightened woman from the auction block was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, a partner, an anchor, a voice of courage when doubt threatened. Inside the cabin, they could hear the children shifting restlessly in their beds. The smell of smoke still clung to their quilts and clothes, a reminder of how quickly safety could vanish. Hazel knelt beside Miriam's crib, Dale joining her after a moment's hesitation. In the dim light, she lifted her voice in prayer. "Lord, grant us wisdom for this path," she whispered. "Show us how to defend truth without violence, how to stand firm in faith when fear presses close. Protect these little ones and help us guide them in your ways." Dale bowed his head, his shoulder brushing hers. "Amen," he murmured, humility replacing doubt in his voice. Through the window, stars wheeled above the valley, the same stars that had watched over generations of Yodas, over Ute hunters, over all who had sought peace in this land. Hazel felt their ancient light like a blessing, a reminder that some things endured beyond man's greed and fire's fury. A week after the barn burning, morning fog cloaked the county courthouse square. Dale guided the wagon through the gathering crowd, Hazel beside him. Behind them, Henry rode his painted horse, while Reverend Thomas followed in his small buggy. The courthouse steps teemed with men in fine suits, railroad lawyers clutching leather portfolios and wearing superior smirks. Inside the courtroom, oak benches creaked under the weight of curious onlookers. Dust motes danced in sunbeams streaming through tall windows. The railroad's chief lawyer, Agent Carter, lounged at his table, examining his gold pocket watch with studied indifference. Judge Monroe, grey-haired and stern-faced, called the court to order. His gavel's sharp crack silenced the murmuring crowd. "Present your case," he instructed, nodding toward Hazel and Dale's table. Hazel rose slowly, smoothing her plain dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the brittle deed copy, but her voice rang clear and steady. "Your Honor, this document proves the Yoda family's rightful claim to Paradise Valley, including its water rights. The deed was properly recorded and witnessed 15 years ago." Agent Carter's smooth voice cut in. "Objection, Your Honor. This woman has no standing here. She was bought at auction, property herself until recently. Her words carry no legal weight." Whispers rustled through the courtroom. Heat flushed Hazel's cheeks, but she held her ground. Dale stood then, his tall frame straight and dignified in his simple black coat. "Your Honor, if I may speak?" At the judge's nod, he continued, his quiet voice filling the hushed room. "Hazel Keene's worth is not bought or sold. She stands here by right and truth, carrying wisdom that God has given her. I trust her judgment with my land and my family's future." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge's eyebrows rose, but he gestured for the testimony to continue. Reverend Thomas approached the bench, his Bible worn and familiar in his weathered hands. "I witnessed the original deed signing, Your Honor. This copy matches it exactly. The Yoda claim is true and just." Henry stepped forward next, his bearing proud despite the sideways glances from some townspeople. "The valley was granted jointly," he explained. "My people and the Yoda family share these waters by treaty and deed both. We stand together against those who would fence what God made free." Agent Carter's lawyers huddled, whispering urgently. Their confident smirks had faded. Carter himself stood, waving a sheaf of papers. "Your Honor, the railroad's development rights supersede these. Quaint local arrangements. Progress cannot be held hostage to sentiment." Judge Monroe's stern gaze swept the courtroom. He studied the deed copy carefully, asked several sharp questions about dates and boundaries, then fell silent. The crowd held its breath as he deliberated. Finally, he straightened in his chair. The law must protect all rightful claims, not merely the powerful. This deed stands valid. The valley lands and water rights remain jointly held by the Yoder family and their Ute neighbors. The railroad is hereby barred from fencing or restricting these waters. His gavel fell with finality. For a moment, silence gripped the room. Then cheers erupted from the gallery. Agent Carter stormed out, his lawyers scurrying behind him. On the courthouse steps, townspeople surrounded them with congratulations. Henry clasped Dale's hand, nodding once in quiet satisfaction before mounting his horse. Reverend Thomas beamed, offering a prayer of thanksgiving that many joined. Hazel stood in the sunshine, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Dale's strong fingers found hers, twining together in a grip that spoke of more than victory. "This is God's doing," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. That evening at the modest inn, they sat in the small parlor after supper. Lamplight cast soft shadows as they spoke of the future in hushed, wondering tones. "The children will need a proper mother now," Dale said softly, his eyes meeting Hazel's with quiet intensity. "And the valley needs all its family together," Hazel replied, her heart thundering in her chest. Though neither rushed to speak the word marriage aloud, their hearts were already pledged. The silence between them hummed with promise, sweet as spring water, strong as ancient deeds. Dawn painted the mountains gold as they began the journey home the next morning. The wagon rolled steadily toward Paradise Valley, carrying not just victory, but the first fresh shoots of love growing sure and strong in fertile soil. The morning sun cast long shadows across Paradise Valley as wagons rolled into the Yoder homestead. Neighbors arrived, bearing tools and determination, their former divisions forgotten in the spirit of barn raising. The air filled with the sharp ring of hammers and the rhythmic scrape of saw teeth through fresh-cut pine. Dale worked alongside the other men, his plain black coat set aside as he helped position heavy beams. Every so often, his eyes would find Hazel, and a smile would soften his weathered face. She moved between the outdoor cooking fire and the work site, her broad shoulders straight with purpose as she carried water and food to the laborers. Ruth shadowed Hazel's steps, pride evident in her small face as she helped prepare cornbread and stew. "May I carry the next basket?" she asked, eager to be useful. Hazel nodded, touched by the girl's newfound devotion. The day progressed steadily, marked by the rising frame of the new barn. Where ashes had marked defeat, hope now stretched skyward in sturdy posts and crossbeams. Samuel, his leg still healing, sat with younger children, whittling small toys from scrap wood and watching the work with bright eyes. By late afternoon, the skeleton of the barn stood complete against the deepening blue sky. Women spread quilts on the grass, laying out a feast of shared dishes, golden loaves, steaming beans, roasted chicken, and sweet pies. The aroma drew tired workers to rest in the shade of the new structure. Henry arrived as the sun began its descent, leading several Ute families who brought dried meat and fresh-caught fish to share. In his hands he carried something wrapped carefully in soft leather. The conversation quieted as he approached Hazel. "This bowl," Henry said, unwrapping a beautifully carved wooden vessel, "speaks of the water we share, the life that flows between our peoples." His dignified voice carried across the gathering. "Like the stream that feeds our valley, it has no walls or fences." Hazel received the gift with trembling hands, running her fingers over the smooth curves and intricate designs. "Thank you," she whispered, understanding the deep significance of the gesture. Dale stood beside her, his hand finding her shoulder in gentle support. As twilight painted the mountains purple, neighbors bid farewell, leaving behind a day's good work and the promise of continued unity. The new barn's frame cast long shadows across the yard, where children played in the last light. Inside the cabin, lamplight created a warm circle of intimacy. Dale gathered his family, Samuel propped carefully in the cushioned chair, Ruth cross-legged on the floor, and little Miriam drowsy in Hazel's lap. The flames flickered in the hearth as Dale cleared his throat. "There is something important we must speak about," he began, his steady voice carrying the weight of ceremony. "Hazel is not merely our helper, sent by God's grace in our time of need." He paused, his eyes meeting each child's gaze. "She is my chosen wife, and your mother now." Tears welled in Hazel's eyes as Ruth sprang up, flinging her arms around her neck. "I knew it!" the girl exclaimed, nearly squeezing too tight. Samuel sat straighter, a solemn nod marking his acceptance of this new truth. Miriam, though barely understanding, clapped her small hands in delight at the joy surrounding her. Dale knelt beside Hazel's chair, taking her rough, work-worn hand in his. "You are just right for me," he said softly, his voice breaking with emotion. "Just right for all of us." Warm summer breezes rustled through Paradise Valley, carrying the sweet scent of ripening wheat and fresh-cut hay. The new barn stood proud against the mountain backdrop, its fresh timber glowing honey gold in the afternoon light. Inside the cabin, Hazel worked dough with practiced hands, humming an old hymn as flour dusted her apron. Little Miriam toddled around the kitchen, clutching at Hazel's skirts with sticky fingers. "Up!" she demanded, reaching with determination. Hazel smiled, pausing her work to lift the child onto her hip, earning a delighted giggle. The cabin door creaked open as Dale stepped inside, brushing trail dust from his plain black coat. His eyes found Hazel's immediately, crinkling with warmth as he watched her sway with Miriam. The peace in his expression spoke of contentment deeper than words could reach. "Supper's nearly ready," Hazel said, setting Miriam down to check the bubbling pot of beans. Ruth had already set the table with careful precision, while Samuel arranged the wooden cups just so. They gathered around the table as evening settled outside their windows. Dale bowed his head, leading them in prayer with steady reverence. Lantern light cast a gentle glow across their faces as they shared the simple meal. Fresh bread still warm from the oven, beans seasoned with herbs from Hazel's garden, and sweet preserved peaches for dessert. Samuel spoke of his day's lessons, pride evident as he showed Hazel his improving penmanship. Ruth described the new calf in the barn, while Miriam pushed beans around her plate with determined concentration. Their voices blended comfortably, like a well-practiced hymn. After the dishes were cleared and the children tucked into bed, Dale touched Hazel's elbow gently. "Walk with me," he asked, his voice soft in the quiet cabin. They stepped out into the velvet darkness of a mountain night. Fireflies danced over the meadow grass like scattered stars, their light reflecting in the creek that wound through their land. The water's steady murmur provided gentle accompaniment to their footsteps. Dale led Hazel to a spot where the grass grew thick and sweet near the creek bank. Here, beneath the vast canvas of stars, he turned to face her. His expression held such tenderness that Hazel's breath caught in her throat. Slowly, deliberately, Dale lowered himself to one knee. Rather than offering a ring, he extended his work-worn hands, palms up in supplication and promise. "Hazel Keene," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion that made it rough around the edges. "God brought you to us that day in town, though others could not see your worth. You've proven yourself not just capable, but essential to this family. To me." He drew a deep breath. "I promise you a lifetime of steadfast care, of honest work beside you, of faith shared and children raised in love. Will you be my wife, before God and our community?" Tears spilled down Hazel's cheeks as she reached for his hands, drawing him to his feet. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with joy. Yes, Dale Yoda. They stood together in the starlight, no longer the mocked woman from the auction block and the quiet widower with too many burdens. Now they were simply Hazel and Dale, chosen and choosing, their hearts aligned as surely as the stars above them. The night wrapped around them like a tender blessing as they gazed over their land. The new barn stood as testament to community restored, its solid frame promising shelter for generations to come. Behind them, the cabin held their sleeping children, warm and secure. Beyond, the eternal mountains rose black against the star-strewn sky, ancient guardians of their valley home. Hazel leaned into Dale's steady strength, finally believing deep in her soul that her life held purpose, far beyond the shame that had once defined her. Here she was cherished. Here she was needed. Here, in this valley with this man and their children, she was home. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.